My name is Henry, and I've always found myself caught between the remnants of a life that was never truly mine. It's a strange feeling to walk through the motions, to accomplish so much, yet still feel as though I am living in the shadows of others. At 48, I find myself standing at the crossroads of a successful career and an equally unsuccessful personal life. My story, though, is not one of triumph, at least not the kind that matters to the people who've been closest to me. I am the overlooked son in a wealthy family, the one who always seemed to fade into the background while everyone else took center stage. Growing up, I was never the one who got the praise, never the one who was seen as the future. My older brother, Tom, was the golden child, tall, confident, outgoing, and above all, incredibly successful. He had everything handed to him, our father's approval, the business acumen that seemed to come effortlessly, and the kind of charm that made people gravitate toward him. Tom was the one everyone looked up to. He was the heir to my father's empire, the one who would inherit the sprawling estate, the financial wealth, the power, and then there was me. I wasn't the failure in the family, but I was always cast in the role of the responsible one, the one who was dependable, the one who could always be counted on to keep things running smoothly. But that's where it ended. There was no admiration, no real recognition of my abilities. My father, a self-made man who had built an empire worth hundreds of millions, always had his sights set on Tom. And no matter how hard I worked, no matter how successful my own business ventures were, it was never enough. I remember feeling like I was never quite in the right place. Our home was grand, a sprawling mansion nestled in the hills, surrounded by acres of manicured gardens, but I never felt at home in that world. It was a world of opulence and expectations that I never quite understood. My father's empire, which spanned multiple industries, was built on the backs of countless men and women who worked tirelessly to bring it to life. But to my father, that empire was a legacy that was meant for Tom to carry. I was simply the one who kept the machines running while everyone else took the glory. The comparisons were subtle at first. When we were kids, they didn't seem as important, but as we grew older, the weight of them began to grow. "Why can't you be more like Tom?" my mother would ask, though she never meant it maliciously. It was simply her way of saying that I wasn't enough. I wasn't the son she'd hoped for. I wasn't the one who could bring honor to the family name. I was the one who worked behind the scenes, who made sure everything went smoothly, but no one ever noticed. I was the one who was always good enough, but never quite exceptional enough. As an adult, nothing changed. My career in business, though successful by most measures, seemed like a mere afterthought compared to Tom's. He was the one who made bold moves, took risks, and lived the kind of life people talked about. He had the luxury cars, the expensive watches, the beautiful wife, everything that came with success. Meanwhile, I was stuck in the background, always living in his shadow, constantly reminded that I would never measure up. I'd always tried to be content with my position. After all, what more could I want? A nice home, a successful business, a family who still had love for me, even if it wasn't the kind of love I craved. But deep down, a quiet resentment began to take root. I had been cast as the supporting character in a story that was never my own. I had worked my whole life to be the responsible one, the reliable one. But in the end, I was never the one who was truly wanted. That was Tom's role. And so, I settled into my life, but always with that simmering feeling of being second-rate. I learned to keep it hidden, to accept the role I had been assigned, but every once in a while, the weight of it would feel unbearable. Would I ever be seen for who I truly was? Or was I destined to remain the overlooked son in a family that could never understand my worth? It wasn't until the day of Tom's wedding that I realized how deep the wounds in our family truly ran. My father's death had already set the stage for what I would later understand as the beginning of my own unraveling. But it wasn't just the loss of my father, or the inheritance that caused the deepest cut. It was the events that transpired during the wedding celebration, an event that should have been a joyous occasion, but instead became a stark reminder of how little I truly mattered in my family. Tom's wedding was a lavish affair. Of course, it had to be. Tom always did everything in grand style, and this wedding was no exception. It took place in a venue that could easily be mistaken for a palace, an ornate estate with marble floors, gold-plated chandeliers, and a sprawling ballroom that could hold over 500 guests. The guest list was an all-star collection of the city's wealthiest and most influential people. There was no question it was going to be an event talked about for years to come. At the heart of this celebration was Tom's bride, a woman who was as stunning as she was cold, a socialite who had eyes only for Tom's wealth and status. Her name was Rachel, and she had already begun to cement her place in our family. Despite my reservations about her, from the very first time I met her, I could tell she was more interested in the family's empire than in Tom himself, but Tom was blinded by his infatuation. I arrived at the wedding dressed in my best suit, ready to play the part I had always played, being the responsible, supportive brother. I greeted a few people, exchanged pleasantries, and stood by while Tom was showered with praise and admiration, but as the evening wore on, something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, but the unease grew as the night progressed. The moment that truly shattered everything for me came during the reception. The wedding cake was served. Speeches were made, and all eyes were on Tom and Rachel as they danced their first dance. I was standing near the back of the room, watching them from a distance, when I overheard a conversation that would change my life forever. Rachel, leaning in close to Tom, whispered in his ear, and I couldn't help but overhear a few words. "Don't forget to give Henry his cut. He'll get his money. Eventually. Just don't let him think he's entitled to more than he deserves." Those words cut through me like a dagger. It wasn't just the casual cruelty with which she spoke about me. It was the tone of entitlement in her voice, the complete disregard for my feelings. And it wasn't just the insult. It was the fact that I had been reduced to nothing more than an afterthought in a family that should have cared for me. I had been invited as an obligation, not because I was wanted. I stood there, stunned, for a moment, feeling as though the floor had dropped out from beneath me. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just about the wedding. This was about my entire life. My role in the family had always been that of the second choice, the one who could be relied on but was never truly loved. But now, even that was being stripped away. I was nothing more than a financial transaction to them, and worse, my brother was complicit in it all. But the true devastation came when I was later called aside by the wedding planner, who handed me a small envelope. I opened it to find a note from my father's estate lawyer, informing me that my portion of the inheritance had been a mere $1.5 million, an amount so small in comparison to the $100 million family fortune Tom was receiving. It felt like a cruel joke. I had been left out entirely. But that wasn't the worst part. I learned later that Tom had secretly been diverting funds from the family business for years, siphoning off millions into his own accounts under the guise of investments. In total, he had taken nearly $20 million from the family's wealth before my father's death. It wasn't just theft, it was the ultimate betrayal, and I was left to pick up the pieces while Tom stood at the top, untouched, untouchable. I tried to process everything that had happened, but I couldn't. The overwhelming emotions of betrayal, anger, and hurt flooded over me. I had given my life to this family. I had sacrificed my dreams, my aspirations, for the sake of holding things together, of keeping the peace, and now, this was how I was repaid. I confronted Tom that night, but it was as if nothing had changed for him. He stood there, with a smug look on his face, his hand on Rachel's arm, completely indifferent to my pain. He didn't even bother to explain himself. The conversation was brief, almost dismissive. He simply shrugged it off, muttering something about how things were complicated and that I shouldn't make a scene. But the truth was clear. The family, the wealth, the business, it was all his, and I was nothing more than an outsider in my own bloodline. Tom didn't just take the fortune from me, he took the one thing I had left, my dignity. That night, I drove home alone, replaying everything in my mind: the wedding, the insults, the betrayal. I had been stripped of everything, and yet I couldn't help but feel that something inside me had changed. I had been broken, but in that moment, I realized that I was no longer willing to play by their rules. The game had changed. I didn't need them anymore. As I sat in my empty home, the weight of the inheritance, both the money and the emotional cost, felt like a heavy burden I no longer had to carry. But it also made me wonder, how far would I go to get what I was truly owed? And what would I do with this newfound power I had discovered within myself? The storm was only beginning. The night of the wedding was the last straw. I left early, a decision that shocked even me. My father's funeral had been a few months earlier, and with it came the typical family drama, the hollow words of condolences, the forced smiles, and the same tired expressions of grief that were expected of us all. But this wedding, Tom's wedding, was different. It wasn't just the money, or the lavish ceremony, or even Rachel's cold demeanor. No, it was the final realization that I had been living in the shadows of a family that never truly saw me, and it stung far worse than I could have ever imagined. After the wedding, I went back to my apartment, alone. The silence of the place felt suffocating, but somehow it was a relief. I couldn't stomach the idea of facing my family anymore, not after everything I had learned. I didn't want to hear their excuses, their justifications, or their hollow reassurances. I had been living in their shadow for far too long, and now I realized that nothing I did would ever be enough. I wasn't their son, I was just a means to an end, a placeholder, a convenient second choice. That was it. That was the sum of my worth to them. Days passed. The house felt colder with every passing hour, but it gave me the space I needed to think, to process. I poured myself into sifting through the financial documents I had obtained from the family lawyer. Tom's siphoning of millions from the family business wasn't just an act of financial betrayal. It was an utter disregard for everything I had ever been. I had spent years defending the family's legacy, watching as Tom flaunted his success, never once questioning how he achieved it. But now, seeing the numbers laid out in front of me, the truth hit like a freight train. Millions, $20 million to be exact, had been quietly funneled into his personal accounts. That money wasn't just the company's wealth, it was mine too, my share, my inheritance. I sat there, staring at the documents, the weight of the numbers suffocating me. My throat tightened as the tears threatened to spill, but I held them back. I wouldn't let them see me break. Not now. Not after all these years. I couldn't afford that kind of weakness, not anymore. My thoughts churned, a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Was I ever truly part of this family, I thought to myself? gripping the papers tightly in my hands. The question echoed in my mind, reverberating louder with each passing second. My father, Tom, Rachel. They all made it clear that I wasn't. I had never been more than a convenient placeholder, the one who could keep things running, make everything look good on paper, but never truly step into the spotlight. And now, with this betrayal, the truth was undeniable. I had spent so many years seeking their approval, my father's approval, Tom's approval, fighting for a place that I would never be allowed to occupy. Had all of it been for nothing? I couldn't escape the memories of the countless times I had been overlooked, dismissed, or made to feel like an afterthought. There were the family dinners where Tom regaled everyone with stories of his latest business success, and I would sit there, silently, my achievements never even acknowledged. I had always been the one who stayed behind, cleaning up the mess, doing the heavy lifting while Tom played the role of the charming heir, but the truth was he didn't need to do any of the work. He never did. It was always me. I was the one who made the hard decisions, who kept the business afloat when things were tough, who sacrificed my personal life for the sake of the family. And yet, it was always Tom who took the credit. Tom, who was rewarded, who was adored. I could feel the anger building again, simmering beneath the surface. But there was something else, too, something that felt far more insidious. It was doubt, a deep, gnawing doubt about who I really was, about whether I had ever been more than just a tool for the family's success. Was my worth really tied to money? Was I only valuable because I could provide? The thought made my stomach churn. I had spent my life building things for them, working my fingers to the bone, and now I realized that none of it mattered, not to them, not to anyone. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, the sudden noise slicing through the silence of the room. I picked it up, expecting it to be another message from the family lawyer or from Tom, but it was a text from my mother. The message was simple, but it struck a chord. Henry, we need to talk. Tom wants you to come over. I stared at the screen for a long moment, the words swimming in my vision. I had no desire to face them. The thought of walking into that house again, of playing the role they had cast me in, made my skin crawl. They would try to sweep everything under the rug, act as though nothing had happened. But I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. I had given up too much of myself. And for what, to be a pawn in their little game? No, I wasn't doing it anymore. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I typed out my response. I'm done. I'm done with all of it. I sat back, feeling a weight lift off my chest. It was done. I had made my choice. I wasn't going to be the one to patch up their lies anymore. I wasn't going to be their fallback, their safety net. I had been living my life for them. But now, it was time to live for me. As the days passed, I felt a sense of clarity begin to take shape. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their wealth. What I needed was to find my own path, to carve out a life where I wasn't defined by the expectations of others. It was going to be hard, difficult, even, but I had no choice. I could either let them define me for the rest of my life, or I could take control of my own destiny. The question that haunted me now was, what was I willing to sacrifice for that freedom? The answer was still unclear, but one thing was certain: I wasn't going to let them dictate who I was any longer. Was it too late to start over? Could I still find meaning in my own life, outside of their expectations? Only time would tell, but for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the unknown. I was ready to face whatever came next on my own terms. The moment I signed the papers, the feeling of control surged through me. It was a strange sensation, one I had never experienced before. For years, I had lived in the shadows, watching my brother, Tom, seize everything he wanted: the family wealth, the business, the admiration of our father. He took it all, and I was left with the scraps. But now, in the most ironic twist of fate, I was taking back the power. With the inheritance I had been granted, barely a fraction of what Tom would receive, I decided to make a move that no one would expect. I purchased the very house Tom had always dreamed of, his fantasy mansion, the one he had often talked about owning but could never afford. The $25 million estate was located in the most prestigious neighborhood in the city, a property that was the epitome of luxury and success. Marble floors, sweeping staircases, an infinity pool overlooking the city skyline, and a garden that could rival the most famous estates in the world. It was everything Tom had ever wanted, and now it was mine. But I wasn't content with just buying the house. That wouldn't be enough. No, I needed something more. I needed a statement. So I did what no one saw coming. I didn't just move into the house. I made Tom my tenant. I sent him a letter, a simple note, informing him that he would be renting the property from me, with a monthly payment that would require him to stretch his finances just to make ends meet. Tom, the golden boy of the family, was now reduced to paying rent to the very brother he had betrayed. I can't explain why I felt such a sense of satisfaction in that moment. I wasn't a cruel person, and I didn't want to destroy Tom. But the irony was too perfect. The tables had turned. For once, I was the one in control. I had lived my life for so long in his shadow, constantly trying to measure up, to prove myself worthy of a family that would never truly see me. And now, here I was, sitting in the lap of luxury, while Tom, who had always taken everything for granted, was forced to live under my roof. The first time I saw him after the move-in, I couldn't help but smile inwardly. He arrived at the house with his wife, Rachel, looking absolutely stunned. They both stood there, frozen, staring at the sprawling mansion that was now mine. Tom, the man who had spent years flaunting his success, was speechless. Rachel, ever the opportunist, quickly regained her composure, but there was a look of disbelief in her eyes. She tried to hide it, but I could see the cracks in her polished exterior. "Henry," Tom finally said, his voice tinged with confusion and anger. "What is this? This is my house." I leaned back in my chair, casually observing his discomfort. "It was your dream house, wasn't it? You've talked about it for years. I thought you'd love it here." His face reddened, and I could see the gears turning in his head. He was trying to process the situation, trying to figure out how to regain control, but the truth was, he was powerless. He had no choice but to accept the fact that I had won. "I don't know what game you're playing, Henry," Tom said, his voice now more forceful. "You think this makes up for everything? For the years of hard work I've put into this family? You think you can just take everything from me?" I didn't flinch. Instead, I stood up slowly and walked toward him. "You've always taken everything, Tom. You've taken our father's approval, the business, the house. You've taken my place in this family. I was always the one who worked behind the scenes, never asking for anything. But now, I'm taking something back. You may have stolen my inheritance, but this is mine." Rachel, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. She shot me a look that was meant to be intimidating, but I wasn't fazed. You think you've won, don't you? She said, her tone sharp. This isn't a game. Henry, you're not the only one who's been hurt by this. We've been through a lot, too. Her words cut through me like a knife, but I refused to let her see my weakness. Hurt. You think you've been hurt. You've spent your entire life looking for ways to profit off of others. You've never cared about family. Rachel, you've always been about the money, and now you're just reaping what you've sown. For a moment, there was silence. The weight of my words hung in the air, and I could see the frustration building in Tom's eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could get a word out, something unexpected happened. From the hallway, there came a small voice. It was a voice I hadn't expected to hear in this moment, the voice of my 9-year-old son, Alex. He had been standing at the top of the stairs, listening to the exchange between his mother and uncle. I hadn't realized he was there. But now, as he walked down the staircase, the room grew quiet. "Uncle Tom," Alex said, his voice clear and strong for his age, "why are you so mad? You've always told me that being good and honest is the best thing to do. Why are you angry at Daddy?" Everyone turned to look at him, and for a moment, there was a stunned silence. I was frozen, unsure of what was going to happen next. Tom looked at Alex, his expression one of disbelief. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Rachel, too, seemed taken aback by the child's words. Alex continued, unbothered by the tension in the room. "Daddy says that you should always be fair, and that sometimes people do things that aren't nice, but they can still change. Why didn't you change, Uncle Tom? Why are you still mad?" It was as if the room had shifted entirely. Alex's simple, innocent question cut through the layers of anger and resentment, and in that moment, everything felt exposed. The hypocrisy of Tom and Rachel was laid bare, and I could see the cracks in their facade. For the first time, they were forced to confront the truth of their actions not just in front of me, but in front of my son, who had no idea of the depths of the betrayal or the manipulations that had been happening behind the scenes. Tom, unable to answer, just stood there, his jaw clenched. He looked at me, but there was something different in his gaze now. It wasn't the look of the superior, the untouchable heir to the family fortune. It was a look of someone who had been exposed, someone who had been reduced to the very thing he had tried so hard to avoid, vulnerable. For the first time in my life, I saw Tom as he truly was, and the power shifted once again. It was no longer about the house, the money, or the inheritance. It was about something far more important, the truth, the values we held, and the lessons we passed on to those who followed us. "Alex is right," I said quietly, my voice steady. "You could have changed, Tom, but you didn't, and now you'll have to live with the consequences." The room remained silent for a long time. Tom's gaze faltered, and Rachel, who had always been the schemer, now looked uncertain. They both stood there, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But it was clear things had changed. They no longer had the upper hand. I was no longer the overlooked brother. I had taken control, and in doing so, I had revealed the true nature of those around me. And somehow, in that moment, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a beginning. The air in the mansion was thick with tension as Tom stood in front of me, trying to mask his frustration with a forced calm. His posture was stiff, his eyes darting between me and the opulent surroundings that he had once believed would be his, but now were mine. The house, the wealth, the power. It all seemed so unreachable to him now. It was a strange feeling, watching him once the golden child, the heir to the empire, stand before me, stripped of his arrogance and confidence. "You don't have to do this, Henry," Tom said, his voice softer than usual. "This whole thing, it's childish. You've always been the responsible one. I thought you'd understand. I thought you'd see it from my side. I'm sorry. Really, I didn't mean for things to get this far." I almost laughed at his words. The apology was as empty as his promises. It wasn't the first time Tom had tried to apologize for his actions, and each time, it had always been followed by more deceit, more manipulation. But this time, I wasn't buying it. "You didn't mean for things to get this far," I repeated, my voice cold. "Tom, you've been taking from this family for years. You've been taking from me for years, and you think an apology will fix everything." He shifted uneasily, clearly uncomfortable with the directness of my words. "I didn't know what else to do," he said, his eyes flickering with a hint of guilt. "I've always felt like I had to prove myself, that I needed to be the one to carry this family forward. I wanted to make Dad proud." The mention of our father stung more than I expected. The man who had never once acknowledged my efforts. The man who had always favored Tom. The man whose death had been the final push that had sent me spiraling into this moment. "Don't bring Dad into this," I said, cutting him off sharply. "You've always used him as an excuse, Tom, but the truth is, you were never really interested in making him proud. You were only interested in making sure you got everything his approval, his wealth, his power, and you didn't care who you had to step on to get there, even if it was me." I could see the realization starting to settle in, but it wasn't enough for me to stop. I had to keep going, had to make sure that Tom understood just how deeply he had hurt me, how much of my life he had stolen from me. "I've spent my whole life working for this family," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "I've kept things running, made sure everything was in place, while you strutted around taking the glory, and you think you can apologize and make it all right. No, this is the last straw." Tom's expression flickered with something like anger, but there was a hint of vulnerability there too. For the first time in my life, I saw him not as the brother I had envied, but as the man who had been so consumed by his own need for power that he had lost everything else. "Henry, please," Tom said, his voice pleading now. "I'm sorry. I was wrong. I didn't know how else to handle things. I thought I needed to do all of this to secure my future." I shook my head, my frustration building with every word that came out of his mouth. "You never cared about your future, Tom. You cared about control. You wanted everything for yourself. And you didn't care who you hurt to get there. Not me. Not anyone else. It's always been about you. And now, you're facing the consequences." There was silence for a long moment. I could feel the weight of everything hanging in the air, the years of resentment, the betrayal, the years of me playing the role of the obedient, reliable brother. But I wasn't that person anymore. I had stopped being that person the moment I bought this house, the moment I took control of my life for the first time. "I'm done with this, Tom," I said firmly. "Done with pretending everything's fine. Done with pretending that you and Rachel are doing things for the family. I've spent too many years letting you take advantage of me, of my hard work. I've stopped apologizing for my success, for my decisions. I've worked hard for this, and it's time I stopped apologizing for it." Tom opened his mouth to speak, but I didn't give him a chance. I had already said what needed to be said. "I'm cutting all ties, Tom. No more financial support. No more pretending we're one big happy family. I've spent my life living in your shadow, and I'm not doing it anymore. You want to live here. Fine, but it's on your terms now. I'm no longer the one you turn to for help, for approval, for anything. His face twisted with something between frustration and disbelief. You're really going to do this? He asked, his voice sharp now. After everything we've been through, after everything I've done for you. I didn't hesitate. What have you done for me? Tom, you've always used me. You've taken everything I worked for and twisted it into something that serves your own interests. No more. This is my life now, and I'm the one calling the shots. There was a long, uncomfortable silence. Tom stood there, his hands clenched at his sides. His eyes were narrowed, and I could see the wheels turning in his head, trying to figure out how to regain control, but it was too late for that. The power had shifted. Rachel, who had been standing quietly at the side, finally spoke. You're making a huge mistake. Henry, she said, her tone cold, you think this will make you feel better? You think this is some sort of victory. I met her gaze, my own eyes hardening. It's not about feeling better, Rachel. It's about setting boundaries, about not letting you or anyone else control me anymore. Tom shifted uncomfortably, then let out a deep breath. I never wanted this to happen. Henry, he said quietly, his voice losing some of its earlier defiance. I never wanted to lose you, but I can see now. Maybe I've taken too much. I've always taken you for granted, and I've lost sight of what really matters. His words were almost a whisper, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw the brother I had once admired in his eyes, but it wasn't enough. The damage had been done, and I couldn't undo what had happened. I'm not the same person I was, Tom, I said, my voice steady, and I'm not going to pretend anymore. I'm done playing that role. If you want to change, if you want to make things right, you'll have to do it on your own, but I won't be part of it, not anymore. Tom's expression softened, but the realization was clear in his eyes. He knew the game had changed. I had set my boundaries, and this time, there was no going back. As I turned and walked away, I could feel the weight of the years lifting off my shoulders. The confrontation had been painful, but necessary. I had finally freed myself from the chains of my past, from the family that had used me and took me for granted. I wasn't just done with them, I was done with being their victim. The next chapter of my life would be mine to write. Standing in the grand living room of the mansion, I couldn't help but marvel at its opulence, the high ceilings, the polished marble floors, the walls adorned with art that I had only dreamed of owning. The mansion was everything I had ever imagined, luxurious, sprawling, and a perfect reflection of the success I had fought for, but never truly felt I owned. It was my victory, no doubt. But as I stood there, staring at the vast expanse of the room, something inside me stirred, and I realized that the victory felt hollow. This house, this symbol of triumph, was a reminder of everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed, yet it came at a steep price. The cost wasn't just financial, it was emotional. The years of feeling unseen, of being used and undervalued by my own family, had left scars that no amount of wealth could heal. I had won in the material sense, but in the emotional and spiritual sense, I was still empty. The loneliness settled in like a heavy fog, creeping around the edges of my thoughts. I had built this mansion, this life, with my own hands, but at what cost my family was fractured. Tom, my brother, was now a tenant in the very home he once dreamed of owning. and the relationship between us was beyond repair. Rachel, the woman he had married, had shown me her true face, the face of someone who never cared about me, only what I could offer. I had fought for this. I had fought for success, for recognition, for the approval of people who had never truly seen me for who I was, and now that I had it, I realized that the approval I had been chasing all these years wasn't worth the sacrifice. What was the point of owning this mansion, of having all the wealth in the world, if it came with so much pain and isolation? I walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, the view of the city skyline stretching out before me like a sprawling ocean of lights. The night was clear, and the lights below shimmered like stars in the distance. For the first time in a long while, I felt the weight of it all, the weight of my decisions, the weight of my past, the weight of the future that I had yet to define. I asked myself, is this all there is to life should I keep fighting for things that never truly made me happy? The question hung in the air like a heavy cloud, refusing to dissipate. I had spent so many years working for the approval of others, fighting to prove that I was worthy, that I had value. But now, in the silence of this mansion, I realized that I had never asked myself the most important question: what do I truly want? How much of what I did, what I built, was truly for me, and how much of it was just to prove something to everyone else? The house, the wealth, the power, these were all things I thought would give me happiness. But they hadn't. They hadn't filled the void that had always been there, the void left by the years of feeling invisible, of being defined by others' expectations. I turned away from the window and walked back into the heart of the house. It was beautiful, undeniably beautiful. But I realized that beauty alone couldn't fill the emptiness. The truth was, I had been chasing something that had never been within my grasp, something that wasn't truly mine to begin with. I had been chasing approval, chasing success, but in doing so, I had lost sight of what mattered most: my own happiness, my own peace of mind. The irony of it all hit me hard. I had built this life to prove something to my family, to Tom, to Rachel, to myself. And now that I had everything I thought I wanted, I felt more lost than ever. Was this success? Was this the life I had imagined for myself? Was it worth it? I stopped in front of the fireplace, the flames dancing softly in the hearth. The warmth of the fire did nothing to ease the chill in my heart. I could sell this house, walk away, and find something smaller, something simpler, or perhaps I could stay here, but I would have to find a way to redefine what this house meant to me. It couldn't be a symbol of my victory over Tom or the family. It had to be something more. It had to be mine, my home, my space, my sanctuary. But even then, I knew it wouldn't be enough. The house wasn't the problem. It was the way I had been living, the way I had been seeking approval from people who didn't see me. The truth was, I needed to find a new purpose, a new path, one that didn't rely on what others thought of me. As I stood there, contemplating my next move, I realized that this was my moment to stop seeking validation from anyone, my moment to live for myself. I wasn't just going to survive anymore, I was going to thrive, but I couldn't do that while still carrying the weight of the past. I stood in front of the window again, gazing at the city below. The lights flickered, reminding me that life goes on, regardless of what I choose. But that's the thing about life, it's our choices that define it, and I had the power to choose. I wondered, for a fleeting moment, if I could ever truly be free of the past, if I could forgive myself for all the years I spent chasing something I never really wanted, and if I could forgive my family for the ways they had hurt me, for the expectations they placed on me, for the roles they forced me to play. And that led me to the real question. What is forgiveness? Is it something we give others, or is it something we give ourselves? How much of our pain is tied to the way we perceive others' actions, and how much of it is rooted in our own inability to forgive ourselves? When we lose everything, what do we truly gain? And how much of ourselves are we willing to lose to get what we think we want? Those were the questions I had to answer now, not for anyone else, but for me, because in the end, it wasn't about the house, the money, or the family's approval. It was about finding peace within myself, something that no amount of success or wealth could ever buy. And perhaps that was the greatest victory of all,